OpenAI got caught training Sora on gameplay footage without paying anyone a dime. Now there's a startup that lets game devs sell that same data, and the people lining up to buy it include Yann LeCun's AI lab. Here's what happened. A company called Origin Lab just raised $8 million to build a marketplace where video game companies sell their gameplay data to AI labs. Not language model data, not text, physics interactions, 3D environments, player movement patterns, the stuff your game already generates every single time someone plays it. The buyers are labs building something called world models. If you've been following AI, you know the big shift happening right now isn't about chatbots anymore. It's about AI that understands physical space, robots that can navigate a room, autonomous vehicles that can predict what happens next at an intersection, systems that can simulate how objects move, fall, collide, shatter, and interact in three-dimensional space. Yann LeCun, one of the three godfathers of AI, has been arguing for years that world models are the path to genuine machine intelligence, not language, not text prediction. Physical understanding. Fei-Fei Li, who led the creation of ImageNet, is building world labs for the same reason. The biggest names in AI research are converging on this problem, and to train these systems they need enormous amounts of data showing how the physical world works. Real-world data is expensive and slow to collect. You can send a robot into a warehouse 1,000 times, or you can run a physics simulation in a game engine 1,000,000 times. That's where games come in. Your game is already a high-fidelity simulation of physical reality. That's the insight Origin Lab was built on. The co-CEO, Anne-Margot Roder, said it plainly. The AI systems being built now need to understand how the physical world works and how things move, and that data essentially lives in video games. She's right. Your physics engine, your collision detection, your ragdoll systems, your procedural terrain, that's a simulation of physical reality. And it turns out that simulation is exactly what AI researchers need to train the next generation of models. So why does this matter to you right now if you're building a game? Because until this week, there was no legitimate marketplace for this. AI labs had two choices: scrape the internet for gameplay footage and hope nobody notices, or try to build their own simulation data from scratch. Neither option works well. The first one is what got OpenAI in trouble. When the first version of Sora launched, it appeared to regurgitate footage from popular games and streamers. The assumption was that it had been trained on Twitch streams without any licensing. Amazon, which owns Twitch, has been open about wanting to use that footage for model training. But the licensing problem is real. Origin Labs steps into the middle of that problem. Their model is straightforward on the surface. Game companies provide their assets. Origin converts those assets into training data. AI labs buy the licensed data. Everyone gets paid, but the hard part isn't the transaction, it's the conversion. The game's internal representation isn't training ready. You can't just hand a Unity project to an AI lab and say, here's your data. It needs to be transformed into formats that training pipelines can consume. That's where Origin's actual technology lives. What does that conversion look like in practice? A few things. Automated rendering runs. They take your 3D assets and render them from thousands of camera angles, creating diverse visual samples of the same space. Automated walkthroughs. They navigate through your environments, capturing spatial data from every perspective. Physics interaction logs. They record collision events, material responses, fracture patterns, and export those in structured formats. It's the difference between a game that humans play and a dataset that machines learn from. The funding round tells you who's paying attention. Lightspeed Ventures led the $8 million seed. SV Angel, NX, 7 Stars, and FPV participated. The angel investors include Kevin Lin, who co-founded Twitch, and Kyle Vogt, who founded Cruise. Think about what those two know. Kevin Lin knows exactly how much gameplay footage exists on the internet and how valuable it is. He built the platform where most of it lives. Kyle Vogt knows exactly why robots need physical simulation data. He built an autonomous vehicle company that depended on it. The Lightspeed partner who led the deal, Faraz Fatemi, made the business case explicit. He said they've seen how sharp the revenue scaling can be for data vendors serving the major labs. Scale AI proved this model already. Start as a data provider, scale fast, become essential infrastructure. Fatemi's quote is worth remembering. These are very well capitalized businesses, and the bottleneck for all of them is data. The bottleneck isn't compute. It isn't engineering talent, it's data. And your game is sitting on a pile of it. Now let me walk through what this actually means for you if you're building a game as an indie developer. Your game generates several distinct types of data that world model labs are actively looking for. First, physics data. Every collision, every bounce, every fracture pattern in your destruction system. Every time a ragdoll tumbles downstairs, every time an explosion sends debris flying with accurate velocity and spin. That's physical simulation data. Games with realistic or even stylized physics systems are gold mines for this, because the physics engine is already computing how objects interact in a simulated world. Second, 3D environment data. Your level layouts, your terrain generation, your interior spaces. World models need to understand spatial relationships, how rooms connect, how corridors branch, how open spaces relate to enclosed ones. Your game already maps those relationships out in precise detail. That spatial graph has real value for training models that navigate physical environments. Third, movement and navigation data. How characters pathfind through your spaces, how players explore environments, how vehicles handle different terrain types, how projectiles arc through the air. That's behavioral data showing how agents interact with physical spaces over time. World models need exactly this kind of temporal interaction data to learn prediction. Fourth, material interaction data. What happens when metal hits wood, how cloth drapes over objects, how water flows around obstacles. If your game simulates any of this, and most games simulate at least some of it, that's data showing how materials behave under different conditions. That's foundational training data for physical AI. Here's what I think is most interesting for indie devs specifically. You don't need to be a AAA studio with a massive open world. In fact, there's an argument that indie games generate better data per asset than AAA titles. Here's why. A well-built physics simulation game with tight focused mechanics generates incredibly clean structured data. The physics interactions are clear and unambiguous. A driving game with good vehicle physics produces consistent high-quality force and trajectory data. A sandbox game where players build and destroy creates diverse interaction patterns from a simple rule set. A procedural generation system that creates varied terrain produces spatial diversity that no handcrafted level can match. A AAA game with photorealistic graphics might look more impressive, but the underlying physics data is often noisy. There's a lot of visual complexity masking simple physics. An indie game with clean physics and focused mechanics, that's structured learnable data. Quality over quantity. Think about what you've already built. You spent months tuning your physics engine. You adjusted collision response curves, material property tables, fracture thresholds. Players have interacted with that system for hundreds or thousands of hours. All of that interaction data, the specific ways objects collide, bounce, break, and settle, is physical knowledge. It's knowledge about how simulated reality works. And right now, almost all of it disappears. It sits in log files nobody reads, or it doesn't get captured at all. Origin Lab's proposition to indie devs is straightforward. This data has market value, and they'll handle the conversion and licensing. You don't need to build a data pipeline. You don't need a legal team to negotiate licensing terms with AI labs. The marketplace handles both sides. What you need is a game with simulation data worth converting. So what should you actually do with this information right now? Three things. First, if you're building a game with physics, simulation, or procedural generation, start thinking about your data as a separate asset from your game. Your game is the product players buy. Your data is the product AI labs buy. Those are two different revenue streams from the same work. Second, keep your data clean. If you're logging physics interactions, use structured formats. If you're generating procedural environments, keep the generation parameters organized. The easier your data is to convert, the more valuable it is to a marketplace like Origin. Third, watch this space. Origin Lab is the first marketplace, but they won't be the last. As world models become commercial products instead of research projects, the demand for training data will scale fast. The indie devs who position themselves early will have the best data and the most leverage. What types of games should be thinking about this right now? Physics-heavy games are the obvious top candidate. Destruction games, construction games, simulation games, anything with complex material interactions. Open world and exploration games generate valuable spatial data across diverse environments. Driving and flying games produce high-quality movement and terrain interaction data. Even puzzle games with physics mechanics can generate clean training data because the physics interactions are focused and well-defined. The irony here is impossible to ignore. For the last 2 years, game developers have been worried about AI replacing them. AI generates art, AI writes code, AI designs levels. The narrative has been entirely one directional. AI takes from game development, but this flips the script. Game development feeds AI. The same AI labs building tools that could automate game development need game data to train those tools. Your game isn't just competing with AI, it's supplying AI. Game developers aren't just creators anymore. They're data suppliers to the entire AI industry. That changes your strategic position whether you like it or not. And here's the strategic play that most indie devs haven't figured out yet. The big studios will negotiate direct deals with AI labs. They have the legal teams and the leverage to do that. But here's what the big studios don't have: diversity. One AAA open world generates one type of spatial data, one physics model, one set of interaction patterns. 1,000 indie games generate 1,000 different physics models, 1,000 different environment types, 1,000 different interaction patterns. That diversity is what makes training data valuable. Machine learning models don't get better by seeing the same thing more times. They get better by seeing different things. Indie developers collectively produce the most diverse simulation data in the games industry. A marketplace aggregates that long tail and turns it into a product that no single AAA studio can match. There's a risk I want to be honest about. This market is brand new. Origin Lab is a seed stage startup with an $8 million round. The buyers are research labs, AMI labs, World Labs, not yet commercial products shipping at scale. The revenue numbers for participating game companies aren't public. This could become a massive new revenue stream for indie devs, or it could take years to mature into something meaningful. But the direction is undeniable. AI labs need physical simulation data. Games are the richest source of that data on the planet. A marketplace now exists to connect the two sides. Whether Origin Labs specifically wins this market or not, this category is real and it's growing. If you're building a game with AI tools right now, you're already part of this ecosystem, whether you think about it or not. You use AI to write code. You use AI to generate assets. You use AI to test and debug. And now the game you're building generates data that feeds back into the AI ecosystem. It's a loop. You build with AI on one end and your game feeds AI on the other. The smartest indie developers are going to figure out how to capture value on both sides of that loop, using AI to build faster and monetizing the data their games produce. We're tracking every new AI revenue stream for game developers inside AI Craft, including how to prepare your game data for the world model market. If this is the first you're hearing about monetizing game data, you're not alone, but you don't want to be last. Join the community and get ahead of this. The next time someone asks what your game is worth, the answer might be more than you think because the data inside it now has a price tag. Please feel free to subscribe and check out the links in the description below.